Well, thank you very much. President Shukri, thank you, and Dean, Mr. Chancellor, Madam Provost, Madam Chairperson. So good afternoon, and once again, thank you for this great honor of having Sandra and I here today. This is really an extraordinary event for us, and I think the beginning of something even greater for York University. You know, 10 days ago, I had another wonderful honor. I was present at Oxford to witness my 21-year-old nephew, Gavin Elias, receive his degree. Now, traditions run really deep at Oxford. The whole ceremony was in Latin and featured no fewer than several hundred hat tips, or doffs, as they're called in British English. But what was the most striking thing to me was the beauty and the perfection of the site of the ceremony. The Sheldonian Theatre, a standalone structure on the Oxford campus where these graduation ceremonies have been taking place for several hundred years. The theatre was one of the first architectural projects by then a very young Sir Christopher Wren, who went on to become, arguably, England's most famous architect. His work now eventually included 52 churches in London, and of course, his crowning masterpiece, St. Paul's Cathedral. And it occurred to me that the architecture of the Sheldonian Theatre not only reflects the anticipated mission of the building, but also serves as a symbol, in many respects, for the goals of the whole university, and also a statement at the time of its erection of the opportunities that might lie ahead of the year 1664. So when you see the theater, you'll see it's round and it's very intimate. The benches kind of crawl up the sides of the walls, such that every single patron there, you can imagine, could hear the whisper of an actor, or even the nuanced look on his face in front of the whole audience. You know, there weren't wireless microphones in 1664. And then the building has two sets of these massive wooden doors on opposite sides of the theater, because the building was purpose-built to hold graduation ceremonies. And these two different doors represent, in one case, the entering of a young student, a young mind, onto the Oxford campus, and then the other door where they exit, eventually seeing the graduate leaving Oxford and going into the real world. And when I look over and see the new building, it makes me think. The design, the purpose, and the goals of the university really do feel reflected in that building. Our building here is flowing, but in a way it's almost rambling, like the free-flowing ideas of a young engineer or an inquiring mind. Look at it, you'll see it. And these classrooms aren't classrooms in the traditional sense, like at Oxford or like at York when I was here in 1980. But instead, the classrooms here are pods of collaboration that will prepare the young engineer and entrepreneur for the cross-functional requirements of the modern world. And today, we do have wireless microphones, but in fact, this building, I'm told, will have every conceivable engineering technology available and will clearly be Canada's most advanced, most amazing engineering facility. So I'm so very proud, as a York University graduate, and as the proudest of Canadians, to call this building my new symbolic home. It's on this very ground 33 years ago that I wrote my first lines of software and contemplated my own life's journey. Now, the 17th century was perhaps a very different time in many respects, but let me tell you, some things never change. The Sheldonian Theatre was first proposed and contemplated by Dean Fell, who was the Vice Chancellor of Oxford 14 years earlier. in the year 1650. But his timing for raising the funds was awful. England had just ended its Second Civil War, and a law had just been passed, believe it or not, that abolished the monarchy, and King Charles I had just been beheaded for treason. England was, for all practical purposes in 1650, being run by the army as a military dictatorship. So President Shukri, you thought you had a tough time raising money. So after having exhausted all of their political outreach programs, the Vice Chancellor eventually contacted the Archbishop of Canterbury, who pledged £1,000 himself and a commitment to raise the remaining £14,000 that were needed. Now, it turns out that the Archbishop was a really lousy fundraiser, unlike Dean Kaczynski. And so at the end, the Archbishop actually paid the remaining £14,000 himself. And so this is the story of how the Archbishop of Canterbury, his name being Gilbert Sheldon, ended up with the Sheldonian Theatre in his name. And as I said, some things never change. Now, Sandra and I have done very little by comparison, really. Certainly, our friends in government, most notably the province of Ontario, have been spectacular supporters of this beautiful building. And you know, sometimes working with government, it can be difficult. But at the end of the day, we know that they're there for us. And thankfully, they still have their heads. Beheading, kind of remember that. We should also applaud, importantly, Pierre Lassonde, who's here today. He's my friend and a fellow philanthropist, for his leadership in the funding of the Lassonde School of Engineering, without which this building sits anchorless. And Pierre, I love the poetry, actually, of how two French Canadians, Lassonde and Bergeron, are cooperating to create a centuries-long legacy on the former grasslands of Upper Canada. But take note, we are now one Canada, and we're all united in goal to be a beacon of leadership in human rights, economic growth, and of course, educational excellence. So God bless this new building, God bless York University, and God bless Canada. Thank you.